Good day and welcome to the Rising to the Challenge Lessons Learned in Responding to Disasters webinar.
I will now turn it over to our facilitator today, Tracy Tippett.
Hi, I'm Tracy Tippett from the Center for States, and I'm so happy to have everybody on today for this webinar. Thanks, Chris, for going over the housekeeping details. We have a great lineup today, and I'd like to introduce our speakers. We have Kayla Powell, who is a young adult consultant with the Center for States, Michael Weska, who's a family consultant for the Center for States, Melissa Mayo and Patricia Dew from Epic Ohana, Hawaii, Christy Tate and Melissa Maiello from Louisiana Department of Children and Families, and Dr. Deborah Shropshire from the Oklahoma Department of Human Services, and the Honorable Ashley Wilcott from the Center for States. She's a legal consultant with us. Let's take a look at our agenda today. We will be talking about key considerations for disaster response. We will hear stories from the field and strategies to impact preparedness. We'll also hear about lessons learned for future planning, have a panel discussion, and then we'll have our closing for today. In terms of our objectives, we hope that everybody gains awareness of the impact of various disasters to the child welfare system. We want to learn about strategies that other jurisdictions have used to overcome challenges when responding to those disasters. We will identify the purpose and importance of establishing shared goals and values with public and community partners, and describe some effective strategies in starting and maintaining collaborative partnerships between child welfare agencies and community partners. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Weska.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining, and it's nice to see everybody here. As we are starting off our conversation about key considerations for disaster responses, first I really want to put us into a little bit of the context of this conversation. One, I am calling in today from a tribal reservation here in San Diego, California, where I work as a tribal administrator. Disasters come in various forms, as we're learning from COVID. And what I think is really something I want to elevate is how we look at these disasters from multiple lenses. And when we do so, how we do so in a trauma-informed way. You know, last week, had we had this call on schedule, I would not have been able to join you. One of the reasons is because our winds were about 40 miles an hour. And so the power was turned off in an effort to protect us from fires. Thankfully so, because we had 3 power lines go down. Disasters come in various forms and leave their trace in various ways. And so some of the things that we're going to talk about, and as we are all going through the pandemic and we are experiencing COVID, we're recognizing the different variety of disasters that come about. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about the different strategies, the different types of disasters, and with that induces different types of traumas. And so the traumas that we're going to talk about is, and as we're moving through this, is how we use trauma practice during disasters, and different techniques when we're dealing with a disaster. So I want to share a really quick story about, you know, something that happened to me on the way into work. I am driving about an hour and 5 minutes every day, one way. And so one of the things that could have happened this morning is I could have been in a really bad accident. I was driving, a car came on. I was driving down a one-way, one direction, and a one lane coming the other direction, right? And a car was passing another car and came really, really close, and we were both coming at very high speeds. And at that very moment, there could have been a tragedy. Now, that's a very different kind of a disaster, but it would have been a disaster. And what I realized is that at that moment, my body and my mind reacted. And the reaction actually was the right one, fortunately. I was able to respond appropriately as I was driving, but the impact was afterwards, I panicked. I was like, really could feel my blood pressure go up, and it was certainly a different experience. Now that was a near tragedy in my mind, very much could have been a disaster, but I wanted to elevate that because when disasters happen, people react differently. And as I was able to respond in that moment, you know, because I'm an experienced driver, because I have nearly 40 years of driving experience, my mind and my body lined up for that moment, and a disaster was avoided. But I still had the aftermath trauma. I still had the panic afterwards. I still had the reflection there. So I share that story in the context that when we are experiencing disasters, sometimes we don't always experience them, even though we may have the knowledge and we may have the experience, we don't always react appropriately. Another more relevant example is when we have a fire. You know, many of us who are in the fire areas know we have to have certain things packed, we have to have certain things to go, but when that fire happens, something triggers, and if our body and our mind are not on alignment, right, we may forget that important package that we knew we had to grab. And so the trauma effects both in this way can impact the individual experiencing the disaster. But on the flip side of that, we as responders could also experience a different trauma. And here's where it's so important to have trauma practice techniques. We have to acknowledge that that disaster may have impacted that individual in a way that may not have been the most appropriate, most prepared, what have you, and left a residue, so to speak, from the trauma to where they were, for that brief moment, unable to respond appropriately. So when we are approaching an individual who has suffered from or is suffering through a disaster, then at that point, we really have to look at, okay, we have to go in there knowing, okay, this person may have an impact, and we certainly know they have an impact. We just don't know what it is, and we need to be mindful about this, and we need to move forward mindfully as we engage. Here at the reservation, I've seen, you know, first responders, you know, who have experienced with us fires in the past. I've seen, you know, Red Cross members say to people, oh, you know better than that. You forgot your package. You should have done this, this, or this. And really not realizing that, you know, that was not a trauma-informed response, right? You know, we're not there to judge. We're not there. And although Red Cross folks are there for best intentions, you know, we have to come at this from a different standpoint. We have to be mindful about what we're saying, the language we're using, and the impacts that this has, and the different impacts that this has on individuals that we're working with, and how we as responders interpret that. I'll give you a flip also on my earlier story about my driving method. You know, one thing I will tell you is not only am I an experienced driver, but I also have a mindful practice that I do every morning. I leave my home around 4:45 in the morning, and I always say a prayer to the Creator and ask the Creator, you know, this is a long drive. Please be with me as I get to where I need to be. Please, you know, and so I mindfully am changing my whole process, and I'm mindfully recognizing that there could be possible danger. And I do this as a mindful practice. And in fact, I believe, and I think there's some definite behavioral science that supports that once I've triggered my mind to identify that I'm on a journey mission, I go into a different mode. And so I absolutely reacted. And I think that all has to do with the mindful practice. So I hope that was a good example, and I hope that certainly can relate more towards the disasters that we're talking about today. But I do think that when we are taking this approach, when we're dealing with disasters, we have to be mindful and aware of what the value of our involvement and our intervention is and how it impacts the individual. Next slide, please. So this is really important, attention to equity. You know, trauma impacts in different ways, different people, and people show up differently, right? Again, my reservation, for example, you know, we are a poor tribe. And when disasters hit us, they hit us in a much different way. You know, a lot of my tribal members do not have cell phones and still have landlines. Some of my tribal members may not drive, may not own a car. And so, you know, there are going to be different impacts in different ways just based on the population and where the people are coming from, the equitable opportunities that they may have. We need to be mindful about the space that we're going into and the impacts that it could have on the community. I know with COVID right now, for example, you know, being Latino, being involved in the Latino community, it has impacted our barrios in a very different way. You know, a lot of our folks don't have access to Medicare, Medi-Cal, don't have medical access whatsoever, and oftentimes are, you know, not the best nutrition, right? And so they're vulnerable for any kind of ailment already because they're in that demographic. We need to be mindful as we approach those spaces, be mindful of the fact that the equity portion is really relevant when we're dealing with disasters. People may not have access to some of the things that we may take for granted or may think, you know, that they should have or they should have had. Sometimes in preparedness, people still don't have the knowledge and the access based on, again, equity. If they're on an Indian reservation like I am right now, that is so disconnected from the general population. We don't always have folks coming in saying, hey, by the way, you know, we've got this training going on. And so my people are not given the education based on, one, the distance, the poverty level that happens here, because even if they did get the access and they did have somebody offer, many of them, again, may not have transportation. There are other issues that come about. Next slide, please. Mindful communication, more effective communication. This really goes back to, again, the technique of mindful practice when you're dealing as a responder, when you're dealing with, you know, people who've just experienced a traumatic experience, right? And I think it's really important to recognize that if we are aware that this disaster has impacted them somehow, some way, right? We should not be trying to evaluate where that may have happened or where we shouldn't try to evaluate or judge how they should be responding. We should acknowledge that everybody's going to have a different response. And so mindful communication would be for us to really put that in perspective from the beginning. And then at this point, we would move forward with how we engage. And language is key. Language is critical. As I used the example earlier about the individual who said, you know, the Red Cross individual who said, you know better. That person, I know her. She's a wonderful grandma. She had no intention of hurting anybody's feelings or shaming anyone. However, how that was received could very easily have been detrimental to that individual, and that's not where that was not her intent. So being mindful about how we communicate, being mindful about how if we communicate effectively, we will be there to truly support and help people heal through these disasters and provide them the kind of experience and knowledge that they need. Another thing I will say, you know, when disasters hit like this, you know, as my earlier example of my car incident, I know that my blood pressure went up. I know that I had a very brief panic attack. Imagine what happens as you're processing, a fire, an earthquake, or all of these other things. First thing in mind, for those of us who have experienced fires and have experienced some of the other disasters is, for me was, are my children okay? Where are my pets? Where are my dogs? Am I okay? Right? So this is really, really important regarding those types of disasters. Let's talk about COVID as well. With the COVID situation, the impact that COVID is having on our mental health, right? For those of us, who are getting parts of communication that are coming across, there's a lot of mixed messages. There's a lot of mixed communications that are really happening. And unfortunately, it's causing more fear. And there is a lot of trauma happening to even those of us who are not infected with COVID, but are fearful of the COVID. And a lot of that sometimes has to do with the communication that's not being effective, that's certainly not being mindful, in my opinion. And so we really need to take a step back. And for those of us who are communicating and those of us who are addressing individuals who may be impacted by this disaster or pandemic in this situation, we really need to take a mindful approach and a technique to where we are aware that we must be communicating differently because this person certainly has been impacted by some type of a trauma. Next slide, please. Innovative strategies and practices. For those of us who do have the opportunity to be prepared for a disaster, it is important to find out who we can collaborate with, who has already done their work. I have a colleague who likes to say, who's our allies that'll stand next to us? And that's kind of the same thing here. Who in a disaster can we go to? Who should we be linked up with? What collaborations should we build now before the disaster? Now, even from a reservation standpoint, we also are building collaborations now. We don't want to wait for a fire. We don't want to wait for a disaster. We don't want to wait for COVID. I mean, COVID has affected this tribe in various ways. I mentioned we were without power and wind. Well, 2 weeks before that, we were on a quarantine because 3 of my employees tested positive. Many of them were, out of the 3, 2 of them were in the hospital with COVID. We've had tribal members that passed away due to COVID. COVID came here. We did not have collaborations where we can go outside. We are now really taking a look at not just having collaborations for our fires and disasters that are predictable. We're looking for collaborations of clinics. What clinics can our people go to? How do we get them there? And we're trying to do that now before the disasters happen and before, we're kind of learning as we go through this pandemic, as a lot of us are. What is really critical in this is what kind of roles partners will play when you develop collaboration. It's important for everybody to be able to say, well, this is what I can do, and really have it outlined where someone is being able to create a resource guide or a kind of disaster plan, right, where everybody is incorporating what the roles of partners are so that the expectations are deliverable and so that we can each hold each other accountable at some point and so that we have a game plan collectively. Nurturing the partnership is important. It's our intention, especially after our experience with COVID. It is really our intention to develop relationships with other tribes who are experiencing what we're experiencing, learn from those tribes, and really nurturing those relationships so that we can develop future collaborations upon disasters that may be predictable or non-predictable, and making sure that those ongoing relationships are facilitated, nurtured, and cared for. Just like any relationship, it is extremely important to have those ongoing dialogues before the disaster happens. In fact, it would be great if you can meet and have those relationships and never have to have a disaster happen. But at least you need to make sure that your allies are just as equipped as you are, that everybody still has the same role, and kind of have an ongoing conversation about the game plan before you ever need it. Next slide, please. So the impacts of disasters and successful strategies is really, really, really important. You know, I can tell you on our reservation, fire is one of the biggest threats. Pre-COVID, fire was one of our biggest threats. And an impact of a fire could be extremely catastrophic for families. We have approximately 400 people living on the reservation and only 128 homes. So these homes are shelter to a variety of families, right? We have multiple families living in a home. If one home is lost, it incredibly impacts this tribe and all of our people. So successful strategies and techniques is really critical, and the way we deliver those is really important. With that, I would like to introduce my colleague, Kea. Here you go. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So much like Michael mentioned, mindfully engaging and partnering with those most affected is critical for success, and certainly true during disasters. Hawaii is a great illustration of a state who responded with and not for young people during this pandemic. And I'm so excited that we have both Melissa Mayo and Patricia Patty Dew with us today from Epic Ohana, Inc. For Epic Ohana, Melissa works as their youth partner and Patty is their Pono process lead. Both have strong expertise in authentic youth engagement. Patty and Melissa, the stream is yours.
Thank you so much, Keela. Aloha, everyone. We're very excited to be sharing this space with you all today. And I know it sounds really crazy to say because we're excited to speak with you all about how we've been engaging young people during COVID. And that's really weird to hear. But hang in there with me. Of course, as you all just heard, my name is Patricia Dew, and joining me is my colleague, Melissa Mayo. On top of us being employed at Epic Ohana, Inc., we are also part of the High Hopes Initiative here in Hawaii, which is basically our youth leadership board, and we're also Jim Casey Young Fellows. Just some logistics. High Hope stands for Hawaii Helping Our People Envision Success. We're a statewide initiative with youth leadership boards comprised of current and former foster youth between the ages of 14 to 26. We serve as a youth advisory council for the Department of Human Services, Child Welfare Services, and our roles are really to educate, advocate, and collaborate for increased change and opportunities for current and former foster youth, primarily between the ages of 14 to 26. Since the start of COVID-19 pandemic, we've been doing a lot to ensure that we are able to continue engaging with current and former foster youth. The start of this change really began as Melissa and I were inspired by a national town hall hosted by Think of Us, founded by Jim Casey Young Fellows Sixto Council, that also featured Dr. Jerry Milner. We wanted to create a platform in which we could also reach out to young people either currently or formerly in foster care. And after reaching out to Sixto for an initial discussion, I felt like I was really given that push that I needed to recognize that this was the prime moment for a young person to step up and start that movement here in Hawaii. After determining what we really needed to prepare and plan for this virtual town hall, we recognized that we had a lot of support from our High Hopes board advisors and Epic Ohana, and we brought the idea to them. With their support and their priorities truly of valuing youth voice and youth adult partnership, we were able to put together a town hall in 2 weeks with a total of almost 200 participants. Melissa and I were actually the lead moderators in this town hall as well. Some important things that we did in this town hall was we collaborated with our Child Welfare Services branch administrator to provide transparent updates on Child Welfare Services response and services since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. We also collaborated with numerous young people to create a video message of hope, not only for those young people online with us, but for everyone who joined us during the town hall. We also collaborated with various agencies to provide general updates. We recognize that while we service young people within child welfare, that we also needed to think about how are young people being impacted with employment, housing, education, for those young people who are in extended foster care, the judiciary system, what was happening, because we knew that they wanted to know. We also asked these various agencies to be champions for us in sending out invitations to young people, spreading the word on social media, and also linking us to additional resources. In this town hall, we provided young people a space to truly voice their concerns and questions that could be answered in real time with the necessary connections to supports and resources available to them. We also taught them a lot of information about COVID-19 basics, such as data and tips on how to manage their physical, emotional, and mental connectivity during that time of the pandemic. We also provided what we felt was the most important thing, a sense of hope, that we were still here, we were still doing our best to ensure that they were being taken care of, and we weren't going anywhere. The most important thing that happened during this town hall, though, is that young people were helped in real time. For example, some of the issues that happened during this town hall is that young people were asking, why am I living in a shelter and I'm not being provided with face masks? There was a family who joined us on our town hall, and they said, hey, I don't have access to fruits and vegetables, fresh fruits and fresh vegetables. We had a list of the top concerns that young people brought with us to the town hall, and that's actually the small picture you see on this slide here. And the beauty of this town hall is that young people actually felt the power of their voice and how much their voice could actually move change and move people to create that change. Young people did receive a lot of face masks. We did a lot of donations to young people for face masks. And we also helped that family out in achieving their goal of wanting to get fresh fruits and fresh vegetables. And that's even more important because Hawaii is made up of several different islands. So the family that we were helping was actually a family that lived on a completely different island from where the town hall was being hosted. But so many beautiful things happened. So Melissa, do you mind sharing with us, what does that look like to us now?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Patty. Prior to Hawaii's virtual town hall, authentic youth engagement was surrounded with Hawaii's value of community with aloha, warm hugs, in-person warmth, support, and connection. Youth-adult partnership occurs by inviting young people to the table to participate in decision-making, advocacy efforts, and grow as a young person while using our lived experience. We used also in-person community events, grant-making capabilities, and more. So after the town hall, we recognized that the way we started off, before the town hall, we recognized that the way we were being connected with and being partnered with was amazing, but we had so much room for improvement. And we created a whole new chapter, what we like to call Authentic Youth Engagement 2.0. And so now it's safe to admit that even once the pandemic is over, we won't be going back to doing things the way we used to. So during this experience, we were handed over the baton to be encouraged and to run with it. One example is when I was asked to provide speaking points to the Child Welfare Section branch administrator for Hawaii. In that moment, I realized the amount of responsibility and trust my adult partners had in us to take that lead in the town hall. We want to continue moving forward and working through exceeding expectations, staying engaged and connected and hopeful for the communities that we serve. And so there's many different things that came out of the town hall, like Patty had said, but one of them was emergency enhancement funds. The High Hopes Youth Leadership Board members decided to use their very own grant-making funds to write a proposal seeking matching assistance from the Hawaii Community Foundation to provide young people between the ages of 18 and 26 who have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic with emergency aid. So approximately 150 young people were able to benefit from these emergency funds. And they were able to use these funds for many different things, whether it was rent, gas, food, childcare, which really helped them during this time. And we worked with our local independent living providers to create an application and distribute these funds to the young people.
Thank you so much, Melissa. You know, one of our other biggest events that we celebrate, the success of young people graduating from high school, was canceled. After seeing the town hall, though, the committee of this event actually decided to divert the money statewide to allow for High Hopes Youth Leadership Boards to host a virtual graduation event for graduates in their county. This event did not only focus on celebrating their successes, but also allowed for a talk story session to happen about aging out of care, resources for them in their community, and how to stay hopeful. Another significant event in Hawaii, known as Ohana's Forever, was also canceled. This event is hosted for young people impacted by foster care and the child welfare professionals that serve them. Ohana's Forever allows for young people to learn about new changes within the child welfare system, and be able to really connect with others from across the islands. We enjoy some ono or very delicious food and have fun with special musical speakers and inspirational guests as well. Normally about 150 young people between the ages of 13 to 26 and almost 300 professionals attend this event. It truly is the highlight of our year. Through the effectiveness, innovation, and creativity of the town hall, it was then decided to host everything virtually. On July 17, 2020, many stakeholders assisted with ensuring the success of this event. Over 200 young people and service providers attended a 2.5-hour event through Zoom to connect, learn, and inspire one another. The most amazing part about this, though, is that young people really took the lead with workshops, being MCs, providing technical assistance, and insights on how do we keep young people engaged, how do we keep those who showed up here with us in this space. And we felt that we were truly using this new Youth Engagement 2.0 model. It's also important to note that 67 young people received tablets, and much work went into guaranteeing that young people had access to join without barriers. We're currently in the process of planning for this event for 2021, all while taking all of our lessons learned from our virtual 2020 Ohana's Forever with us as we make improvements to all those who participate.
Thank you, Patty. One of the other things that came out of the town hall that we started to discover was that youth needed things to do during this time of the pandemic from being disconnected from so many things that they participated. So our youth board in East Hawaii collaborated with one of our community partners, Salvation Army, to put on a COVID-19 toolkit drive-through for our young people in foster care. Our toolkit included self-care items, a booklet of resources, easy recipes, self-care items and tips to use through these challenging times, as well as items to keep them healthy and safe, such as hand sanitizer, face masks, snacks, and other things to keep them safe during this pandemic. Also, during these times of uncertainty, we recognize that young people need to have fun and stay busy. Therefore, we also included some fun items that they can enjoy during this time. And the purpose of the toolkits was to let our young people know that we are still actively thinking about them and wanted to give them something to know that we're still working towards everything we can to have them participate and be connected to us during this time, as well as letting them have something in the absence of one of our annual events that we usually have during the fall season.
And last but definitely not least, there was a lot of technical assistance that Melissa and I provided after the town hall. Numerous of agencies had actually reached out to us and wanted to partner with us to facilitate mini technical assistance trainings. They wanted to know, how do we effectively use Zoom to engage participants? How do we set up polling? Really basic things that we were all learning at the same time, but because they had thought that the town hall was executed very well and there was a lot happening behind the scenes that people actually weren't seeing, they wanted to know, how do we do that? How do we ensure our young people, our families, are able to show up and still connect with us, because relationship building is very important. So many times during these conversations of technical assistance, we were told that there was this secret sauce or magic that took place during the town hall. And in retrospect, as we started to think more about it, what we recognized that the secret sauce we had was in allowing young people, such as myself and Melissa, to truly live up to our potential, all while working alongside adults who truly believed in us, that we could do it, that we could host something this big and continue making changes and impacts moving forward.
Thank you, Patty. And in closing, we think it's important to continue doing all that we can to ensure that we are engaging all young people as we find other ways to partner with them during this time. So we have a few recommendations to achieving this authentic youth engagement partnerships. We recommend that meeting young people where they're at, asking them, do you know how to use Zoom or the other platform that you're used to using? How can you ensure that they have access to technology to support when they engage with you? What support do young people need to fully show up And is it transportation, internet access, more information, etc.? Another big thing is community collaboration, reaching out to other partner agencies who also work with that same population of youth and families to strengthen those youth-adult partnerships, but also those partnerships between the agencies. And lastly, one that I think is most important is shared power. This means giving power to young people in all aspects of the work, not only including their voice, but authentically partnering with them to create deeper systemic change. And so we hope that you feel inspired by our Authentic Youth Engagement 2.0 model to create out-of-the-box, innovative ways in supporting all young people during this COVID-19 pandemic. But in all disasters, especially after return to normalcy as well. This is just the start of continuing our work to engage with young people. So we thank you so much, and we'll pass it on to Tracy.
Thank you so much. It's so important to hear the good work that's been going on in Hawaii with youth engagement. So we appreciate that. Well, let's talk a little bit about what's happening to practice and folks and in programs that we've heard from the Center for States. Again, I'm Tracy Tippett with the Center, and we continue to hear from you all, from our constituency groups, from liaisons, about all of the impact to all of us that we've had. Next slide, Chris. So 2020 has been a difficult year for many of us, but we want to particularly recognize those who are on the front lines. For many of us during the pandemic, particularly, again, our frontline workers, there have been abrupt transitions from in the office to virtual supervision, virtual meetings, virtual trainings, trying to move whole training systems from in-person to online. We heard initially when the pandemic started that there wasn't an adequate protective gear for our child protection service workers. And then many of us are working from home today, perhaps, with children or family members in the background. And in some of the other examples, we're dealing with friends and relatives who have tested positive for COVID. Some of our own colleagues have tested positive for COVID or are dealing with symptoms. And at the very worst of that, we've lost family members. And so the pandemic has really stretched all of us, and I think will continue to do so for a while. We also know during 2020 we've had fires and hurricanes, and we've had folks who have been displaced. We heard Michael talk about the experience of trauma and how so many of us and so many of our workforce members have been experiencing secondary trauma as a result of all of these things that have happened in 2020. We know that many of our folks who are in the hurricane regions or in fire, where the fires have been, have lost homes, belongings. We've had colleagues that have had to escape the fires in the middle of the night and trying again, like Michael said, to remember to take all the things with them that they need. And just the overall concern for family members in the midst of trying to work and live this surreal life of experiencing all of these traumas, it takes an impact on our mental health. And then, as we will hear from Louisiana also in just a little while, the responsibility for locating children, and whether they're in foster or kinship or adoptive homes or visiting with birth families when a disaster hits, and the impact that has and the responsibility that weighs on our front line. Can we go to the next slide, Chris? So we really have been spending some time trying to collect resources and strategies about how to support staff during a disaster. We know that there has been, we've had letters from Associate Commissioner Jerry Wilner. We know that the Center for States has put together a lot of resources on disaster preparedness. The National Child Welfare Workforce Institute has also put forth a lot of information on virtual supervision and virtual training. And so what are some of these? And we've heard from you all, and we've heard from constituency groups that what we need right now is absolutely consistent check-ins with our frontline folks, with supervisors, program managers, and however that is possible, whether that's through telephone calls or virtual check-ins, virtual supervision, group check-ins. We've got folks now that are in communities of practice that are doing virtual check-ins with each other. And also modeling self-care. I mean, how important it is to say, let's remember to take some time off. You know, if we've got kids at home or families that are sick, let's remember to take a minute for ourselves. We hope that supervisors, program managers, directors are modeling this as well. And then we also want to be sure that we're reinforcing benefits, right, and talking about EAP situations or where people can find resources. We are also having folks in two-parent homes or single-family homes where one person may have lost a job due to a disaster, so we need to be sure that we are having conversations about where are food banks located and how do we get help and support to folks that need it. And then just making sure that we're addressing distress in the agency culture. Again, Michael spoke so eloquently about the trauma that all of us are experiencing, and it's all relative, right, at this time with all the disasters that are happening. And so how does leadership begin to talk about that in an agency's culture to sometimes folks who have the hardest time taking care of themselves when we're providing care to other folks? And then again, paying attention to subpopulations of the workforce who've been profoundly impacted. Again, we heard about disparity with regard to COVID. We know that certain populations of folks have been more at risk. And again, with Michael talking about the tribal implications and equity, we want to be sure that we're paying attention to all of those things. So let's turn it over now to Melissa Mael, who's going to talk to us a little bit about what's happening in Louisiana. Thanks so much.
Hi. As Tracy said, I'm Melissa Maiello. I'm from Louisiana, and joining me is my colleague, Christy Tate. We're both managers here in child welfare, and today we're going to talk to you about preparing for practice and program level action during disasters. The next slide, please. The mission of the Louisiana Department of Children and Family Services is working to keep children safe, helping individuals and families become self-sufficient, and providing safe refuge during disasters. Like I said, Christy and I both work for child welfare. However, we know that at any time our mission can change, as evidenced by our department's mission statement. Next slide, please. So real quickly, the high-level framework for emergency preparedness in Louisiana begins with the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, or GOSEP. The Director of GOSEP directs the emergency and disaster operations for the state and controls the activation and deactivation of the state emergency operations, or the EOC. The EOC is where all state emergency activities are managed. The state requires all parish governments to have EOCs from which the parishes can manage emergency operations at the parish level and communicate with the state EOC to ensure close cooperation in emergencies and disasters. Our department also maintains an emergency operations center. DCFS has the primary responsibility for ESCF6, so the emergency support functions of mass care, human services, housing, and emergency assistance. DCFS accomplishes its primary emergency responsibilities for these functions through assignment of DCFS employees in the major operating units of the department to work in shelters, assist in evacuations, and other emergency disaster duties. The department is also required to maintain a continuity of operations plan, or COOP, and Christy will talk to you about how child welfare maintains COOP functions during a disaster. In Louisiana, the Secretary has overall responsibility for the emergency functions assigned to DCFS. However, when a declared emergency or disaster occurs, the normal chain of command shifts, and the Emergency Preparedness Director is empowered to make decisions and expend resources. Upon employment with the agency, staff are assigned roles within the disaster org chart. Staff are either designated as COOP, which means they remain responsible for maintaining the continued operations of the agency. They're either ESF6, which means they're not COOP, or they're available in any capacity necessary, depending on the event that's occurring, or they become ESF6 Special, which means they have a predetermined role in the event of a disaster. Next slide, please. So for example, I'm designated as ESCF6 Special. So once I'm activated, my job becomes the Human Services Coordinator in the Emergency Operations Center. So I'm no longer a child welfare manager during a disaster. I actually become under the operations chief in the DCFS EOC. Child welfare staff have a vital role in the success of DCFS during emergencies. Child welfare staff have a special skill set that is needed during sheltering, so we've created several roles that fall within the Human Services branch. We have a regional Human Service Coordinator. We have Human Services Branch Supervisors, Child Welfare Specialists, Social Service Assessment Specialists, and unaccompanied minor staff. So examples of some of the responsibilities in these roles is to coordinate and initiate foster family contacts using mass communications prior to and during events. So the same mass communication system we use to alert staff is also used to alert foster parents. We can send them a poll or a survey to see how many plan to evacuate. We can send them any kind of notice or link that we create to resources or any information we need them to have. We can also send information to our extended foster care staff or even our residential facilities. These roles are used to coordinate all human services resources within the region during an event and to maintain visibility of all human services activities in state regional shelters. The Child Respite Specialist coordinates all child care activities and resources. They work with all volunteer agencies to schedule child care activities and organize and supervise the setup of children's activity stations. They can also assist with unaccompanied minors in the shelter in the event that we have an unaccompanied minor. We have Social Services Assessment Specialists. These people conduct needs assessments to determine and resolve immediate needs. They provide mental or behavioral health support and referrals and conduct transition exit planning. We also have an unaccompanied minor shelter. We have the capacity to open this unaccompanied minor shelter. This shelter actually came about after Hurricane Katrina when we had a lot of separated families. Thankfully, we haven't had the need to open this shelter for the last few events, but we do have the ability and the capacity to do it in the event we need it. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of one of our largest, or the largest, congregate care shelter that we have. It's located in Alexandria, Louisiana, and you can't really tell from the pictures, but it's a very, very large facility. It's about 100,000 square feet. Obviously, these pictures are very old. This is a pre-COVID congregate care shelter. Next slide. So an after-action review is a structured or debrief for analyzing what happened, why it happened, and how it can be done better by the participants and those responsible for the event in order to learn from the past and evolve in the way the agency responds to emergencies. So all disasters are different and present learning opportunities. So take, for example, the prior slide of our congregate care shelter and considerations that we had to make in light of sheltering and COVID. Obviously, those cots were very close together, and there was a lot of them, so sheltering doesn't look like that anymore. Another example is our child respite specialist who used to plan activities in a congregate care shelter facility. Now, during the last set of hurricanes, we're sheltering in hotels. So those roles are going to continue to evolve because we're obviously not planning children's activities, or if we are, they're a lot different than when you are sheltering in a congregate care capacity. So that's just a very brief glimpse of the ESF side of things related to the Human Services branch roles the child welfare staff fulfill. So Christy's going to talk to you about how child welfare responds to disasters from a continuity of operations perspective.
Okay, next slide, please. And good afternoon, everybody. Christy Tate with Louisiana. I apologize. My webcam does not work on Adobe, so you'll just have my voice for a minute. But anyway, I wanted to talk to you about child welfare protocols prior to and during disasters. So some of the things that we do, first of all, child welfare staff are asked to develop text groups so that we can establish communication between all staff. So for example, managers would be setting up text groups with their supervisors, supervisors with their workers, etc. We found this to be very helpful in keeping in touch with everybody and checking on people. Second, staff develop contact lists of open cases, and they include in those the phone numbers of those people they're working with, their evacuation plans. They include addresses and emergency phone numbers for case members, and that they ensure that their supervisors have a copy of the list no later than 24 hours prior to a storm making landfall or a storm hitting. Staff also ensure that all of our in-home families, safety monitors, caregivers of foster children, extended foster care youth, that they all know, have their workers' information and supervisors' information and tell them to take it with them if they have to leave during a disaster. And then also check in with them to make sure if there's anything that they need and ensure that they're aware if they leave to please notify them. And then staff who have open cases, also for children in foster care or extended foster care, they review and update any placement and contact information within the system 24 hours before the disaster hits. So these are just things we've learned over time that really help the flow and ensure that we can get in touch with our families that we serve when a disaster strikes. So during the disaster, we have implemented a foster parent emergency phone line. It's a 1-800 number. We can activate it each time a disaster occurs, and it's a 24-hour phone line that provides support and immediate assistance to any of our foster parents. Also, we implement timelines for notifications from staff during hurricanes. For example, 48 hours after landfall, staff notify their supervisors if they had to evacuate or remain evacuated, if they had damage to their home and cannot return, and they also just check in on their safety status. We also implement time frames for contact to our families and those that we serve. So, for example, 48 hours after landfall, staff know that they have to make contact on all open cases to check in on people's safety, determine their location, any damages. And one of the things that we implement is for staff that are impacted in the disaster, so staff that are leaving, oftentimes staff in state office will take that role of filling in to contact all of our open cases and clients that we serve for the staff that cannot. So, you know, we keep in touch with each other and we ensure that we're doing these things so that we can provide the best support to our staff and to our families during a disaster. Okay. So we are now going to turn it over to Deb from Oklahoma.
Well, thank you for being on this afternoon. We're looking forward to sharing with you a little bit of our experience around virtual parent and foster parent contact in Oklahoma, especially at the beginning and then through the middle of this very long disaster that we're all surviving with COVID. So if we could go to the next slide. So I serve as the Child Welfare Director here in our state and been in that role now for about 17 or 18 months. I have, just for a little bit of context about me and about our system, I have a background in medicine actually, and so I'm a pediatrician. And you'll see in a couple of these benefits, some of the shifting that we did really we were able to do pretty quickly because of that sort of public health knowledge that I was able to bring to our system. But some other context for our system, we were not utilizing virtual visitation or things like that before COVID. So for some of you in systems that perhaps were, you may sort of look at our experience and say, well, yeah, we already know this. But for us, most of our staff did not even have laptops at the time that COVID started in early March. And so we had to very rapidly equip our workforce and then subsequently equip families that we were serving to be able to communicate with each other. So what we did at the time that we went to telework and kind of everybody went home and we said, please be still and let's try to not spread this virus around in the community, was we said, if a normal visitation schedule, for example, between a worker and a foster parent is once a month, let's increase the frequency of that visit. We also very quickly stopped face-to-face visits between parents and children, again, because we were uncertain early in the pandemic what the spread of the virus might look like, what the disease outcomes were going to be, and we also didn't have nearly the information about how to kind of manage with social distancing and masking and things like that we have now. So we just said, go home, be still, and we'll use other means to communicate with each other. But back to what Michael was talking about with trauma, we wanted to really increase the frequency of our sort of contact with each other, with the people we serve. So we increased the frequency of visits between workers and foster parents, but also between foster parents and the children they're caring for and their parents. And we increased it so much, actually, that foster parents started saying to us, please quit calling me, which had never happened in our system before. Usually they were sort of complaining to me that they weren't hearing enough from their worker. So we thought that was a pretty interesting side effect of the increased frequency of contact, and actually a really pleasant thing to have to work through. We also really saw in the experience of connecting foster parents and those birth families and those sort of parent-child moments on video, we found some really cool natural moments in that. And so I'll give you a couple of examples. We had situations where perhaps the parent was able to video in and read stories to their child who was in a foster home every single night, where previous contact might have been once a week or every other week. We had a really cool situation with a kiddo who was turning 5, and the foster parents and the dad had planned a birthday party, but COVID landed, and we sort of said, stay kind of in your separate homes. And what they did is planned a video birthday party where the dad had a cupcake, the child had a cupcake, and they both lit the candles and then blew the candles out on video at the same time. So we saw our foster parents and our biological families really get very, very creative in how they were communicating with each other. The other thing that we experienced with moving to virtual use of virtual visits was increased participation in our family team meetings, child safety meetings, particularly of maybe a parent who might be working, who could more easily step away and be part of a meeting, or for a parent who might be distant, so lived in a different area, or a dad perhaps that might be distant from the case, or relatives who were even in other states who could participate in those meetings. Next slide. So we gradually returned in Oklahoma to face-to-face visits into May and then early June. We released kind of parent-child visitation restrictions initially, actually because of feedback from foster parents and from some of our teens actually who were in custody. We had teens who were saying, hey, I'm in foster care. I work at the drive-through at the neighborhood fast food store. My mom could drive through and see me. Why can't we actually arrange a visit? And we said, that makes a lot of sense. Let us get out of your way. By June, we had resumed worker family face-to-face visitation, and we continue to do that going forward because our understanding of COVID is different. The equipment we have to equip workers and families with is different, and we've been fairly successful at that so far. The rate of COVID infection, both in whether it's in foster parents, birth families, or in our caseworkers, has not been any elevated compared to, say, the general community. And so we've had success in staying face-to-face, but with some of those precautions. However, we continue to use virtual means for a number of different kinds of activities, particularly if we have hotspots in our state that need extra precautions, if we have families that are particularly vulnerable or children who are particularly vulnerable, and then certainly in our congregate settings where we've had a lot of challenges with COVID. Next slide. So there are both challenges and lessons learned. One of the challenges was just technology. I mentioned that we had not deployed laptops or that kind of technology to our staff. We had desk towers, desk phones. Most of our frontline staff had a cell phone, but they didn't have a hotspot on it. And so we had a lot of technology to deploy even within our own workforce, much less within foster parents and birth families. So we addressed that initially kind of partnering with other systems such as the education system and nonprofits to ensure that people had access to a hardware system they could use, whether that was a phone or a computer or tablet, but also that they had access to the understanding of how to utilize that hardware to do a video call. If you've never done Zoom before or Teams, I mean, we had barely rolled out Microsoft Teams in our department when this happened. All of us had a lot of learning to do to even interact with each other professionally, much less families out there who hadn't used these applications. So we provided a lot of technical support as well as hardware to the families that we're serving. We also, a couple of things that we learned, we really learned that we had contact information for foster parents in a much more centralized way than we did for biological families. And so very, very early on when I was trying to communicate what was happening, why it was we were stopping visits or moving to a virtual platform, asking people questions about what they needed assistance with, I found that I could easily garner a list of foster parent email addresses or the ability to get on a Facebook page and communicate with foster parents. But we had not established the same kind of central communication with our birth families. And that's definitely something that has shifted during COVID that will actually aid us going forward in our general practice as well as through other times of disaster. And honestly, the reason we have all the foster parent contact information the way we do is because of watching other states manage, particularly Louisiana, manage serious disasters where families were scattered, but we just, for whatever reason, had never really finalized that kind of in the biological parent space. And so we've made a tremendous amount of effort around being able to better communicate directly and troubleshoot for our biological families rather than only needing to rely on a frontline worker. That has also helped us as we've had staff that have gone out for quarantine or gotten sick or things like that, because bio families have other kinds of people that they can communicate with than maybe those direct workers and supervisors that they've been interacting with. So it's been a really, really positive thing for us. Next slide. I think moving forward, we imagine that we will continue to use some combination of virtual platforms as well as face-to-face interaction. We really like the benefits of being able to do family team meetings where people who are available can meet in person, but we still have the technology and the ability to make that available to other folks, especially those family members who may live in other places. So that's definitely something that we want to continue to move forward with. I think one thing we've learned above all is that we have to stay flexible and we constantly have to switch strategies. I think we've literally adjusted how to leverage virtual versus face-to-face visits about half a dozen times over the last 6 to 9 months, and I think as the pandemic continues to roll forward, that will continue to need to be true. And then I have a lot of questions and sort of asking many questions around virtual platforms as it relates to how do we know the quality of our communication is good? How do we know what we're seeing is the truth? And so, where folks can put a virtual background up on their screen and those kinds of things, like how do we interact in a way that we can actually see an environment, we actually understand how people are doing, whether that's our staff or the families that we're serving. And then the same goes for related to services, like how do we understand services that are delivered in that space as well, and under what conditions a hybrid or virtual model has the same effectiveness as face-to-face model. So those are some of the things that we're looking at kind of as we go forward on through this pandemic and on to hopefully a different kind of 2021. So now I'm going to turn it over to the Honorable Ashley Wilcox.
Thank you so much, Deb. I appreciate it. I want to talk to you all about what the center has really been doing to continue to support PIP goals implementation during the pandemic. And it's really utilizing virtual means that we now have to do, right? And so part of what we're doing in one state is court mediation being done virtually. And I just want to give a few points to think about. I'm always available after the presentation for participants to reach out. But one of the first things that you want to do is get the court approval. Obviously, you can't have a court mediation program if the court says we don't want it done virtually. But you reach out, you get that engagement. And virtual is something that there are a lot of safeguards I'm going to touch on, but really, really important. Party agreement. You have to get all the parties engaged and invested. The reality is at this moment, virtual is here to stay. I believe we're going to have it in some capacity after the pandemic ends, after a vaccine. And so I do believe that we need to be prepared and keep moving this forward. So you seek the engagement of the parties through different meetings. You seek stakeholder engagement through reaching out in different meetings to ensure that you develop, the last thing on the slide, a detailed process. The devil is in the details. You want it very well thought out. You want it well written. And you want all of the different participants and stakeholders to have input ultimately so that you know it's something people will get behind to make it successful. It's the new normal. And let me just say this, from the court perspective, from the judicial perspective, we've been equipped to handle the new normal in this regard. Many of us, if you were in courtrooms pre-COVID, you saw equipment there. I can promise you, computer screens, computers that weren't being used, that weren't being touched. And the reality is now we've had an opportunity to utilize those, and the courts can create a new normal. It is wide open, and that new normal can be virtual means. We can use those existing structures, to put in place ways to do virtual hearings with safeguards. One of the outcomes I want to share with you that we've really seen is greater participation by families and children and youth. Probably not surprising. If transportation is an issue, if the weather's an issue, they can get there virtually. Almost everyone has a cell phone as a means that can be used to connect. Child participation, my kids clearly use my electronics better than I ever will. So youth can easily engage, which is fantastic. Logistics and benefits, just briefly, the video software, you just have to have within your process standards, what to use, how to use it, who is your knowledgeable court staff that can help monitor, can help put people in breakout rooms, can help troubleshoot, can help find the best platform to ensure that everything is recorded, that there's a clear record, that doesn't need to be recorded can be put in a breakout room and isn't recorded. Very clear instructions for the individuals participating. Does everyone wave in person? Is everyone in agreement we do this by virtual means? Is everyone in agreement that we can do this and remain professional, that you can remain on mute, that you can wait until it's your turn to speak? I've had attorneys, you wouldn't believe what people do, or else you might, with their nose, and you can look up their nose because of how they're seated with the camera. They're eating on screen. They'll bring in snacks during a hearing as if it is truly in court. They would never do that. And so a reminder to remain professional, to demand that professionalism. It's up to a court to run the courtroom. It's up to a mediator to run the mediation. I would empower you to know that that can be done virtually. So it's important to do that. Measurable outcomes with the program for the PIP implementation that's been done virtually, the hearings or the mediations, the data collection that's defined in the process to ensure that we can successfully have hearings and have mediations with those outcomes appropriately captured. The settlements is something else that can be reached. Sometimes those are means and methods to encourage and seek settlements and matters, which is always exciting. One of the things, I'm going to go backwards on purpose because I want to touch on notice processes and due process. Super important in all of this with any virtual hearing, mediation, discovery, is due process. And procedural due process means that parties want an opportunity to be heard. So I would suggest that you need to approach and discuss with your courts a way that that can be done so the parties are still heard successfully, that their voice is heard, that they have the opportunity in spite of it being virtual, and that can be accomplished. So I hope to encourage and empower you and welcome any further discussion about the specifics behind how we have successfully managed this for a mediation program and for court hearings. You're welcome to reach out to me at any time. I'm being brief on purpose because I do want time for panel discussion, so let me turn it over to Tracy for that, and I'll put you on your slide. There you go.
Hi, thank you so much, Judge Wilcott. We appreciate that. During this part of our webinar, we would invite you to interact. We've got 3 chat pods, and you can interact with those interchangeably. We will spend 1 round with each set of speakers, but we want you to feel free to pose questions in any pod as they come to mind. And just a reminder, we will collect any unanswered questions and we'll respond to them with follow-up communication. So in this first pod, we have supporting youth and families during crisis, and we are interested in any questions that you have for Melissa Mayo or Patricia Du about Hawaii's Epic Ohana Youth Program. We would also encourage you to think about any questions you have from Michael Weska, and any strategies that you've seen to support youth and families through times of disasters. So just to make sure we know what's in the second pod, we've got supporting staff and supervisors at practice and program level. We're wondering about any questions you have from Melissa or Christy from Louisiana, or Dr. Deb Shropshire from Oklahoma. So we're thinking about what strategies have you seen that have supported staff and supervisors through times of disaster. And then in our final pod, we've got supporting the system. So what questions do you have for Deborah or Ashley about the strategies used at the system level? And what other strategies have you seen that have supported systems and leadership through times of disaster? So it looks like in the first pod, I just want to make sure we've got a question from Sherry. Hi, Melissa and Patty. How are the agency leaders involved in the roundtable, if they were?
Hi, yes, thank you so much for your question. So in regards, I'm hoping I'm catching this correctly, but in the roundtable, I'm considering the roundtable to be our town hall. We actually invited our child welfare branch administrator to actually attend live on the town hall with us to answer the questions in real time. We did do a lot of prep though, because we wanted to ensure that young people were actually getting the information that was very pertinent to them. So we wanted to make sure they were understanding, like in terms of family visitations, how has that shifted because of COVID? What is the department doing now because of the situation that we're living in? So we didn't just ask them to, hey, provide us your updates. We thought it was important for them to be transparent with all of us in real time. So we invited them to participate live with us in that discussion. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, that's great. And then it looks like in pod 2, we've got a question. Deborah indicated that during a virtual setting there was an increased expectation of monthly worker youth visits or contacts, as well as increases in visitation. Was this process formalized via the regulation or process, and if so, how did you go about implementing it? I think we'd love to hear from Dr. Deb on that one.
Yeah, so I guess, Jonathan, if I don't answer your question quite right, just let me know. But basically, we just told them, meet with your foster family more and work it out kind of case by case. Our expectation was basically if you were having monthly contact, up that to weekly. If it was normally weekly, make it a couple of times a week and keep calling and contacting people until you are comfortable that they have what they need. We also shifted the focus of that conversation to even just basic things. Do you have food? Do Do you have, shelter? Are you working? Have you lost your job? Like, what are all the sort of economic and health impacts that we were concerned that COVID was bringing? And so we sort of shifted the content as well as the frequency. We didn't necessarily document all those in our system. So we still, our regulations were really around what you must do in terms of capturing documentation for reporting purposes. But we captured it in other ways through little contact notes and things like that. And again, to me, the winner was when the family started saying, "Quit calling me so often." That's how we knew we did it well.
Super. Thanks so much. And then to Judge Wilcott, it looks like Vivian James had a question about any advice about getting through backlogs while courts shifted to virtual hearings.
Yep, thank you, Tracy. And I know I've been typing responses in the interest of time. The reality is that's an issue. It's going to take some time to catch up, bottom line, in my opinion, because not all hearings are required to be held in person. All the rest have been pushed off in a lot of states. The reality is, though, virtual means that you can take fewer breaks. You can take a shorter lunch break because people don't have to physically get in their cars and go somewhere. And so that's one way. The other way I have found is it's a transition between hearings because it's not ushering people in and out of the courtroom and the bailiff and the deputies and the metal detectors delaying people. I have found that I can get through more cases timely, not by sacrificing the case, but just by the logistics virtually. So I also have to hope that helps. Those are my only thoughts.
Thanks so much. And it looks like we've got a question for Melissa and Christy. Is your disaster plan you described in your 4B plan? I would like to adopt some of the ideas that you shared in your plan. In Oklahoma, besides COVID, we generally deal with tornadoes, floods, high winds, possibly an ice storm. So I wondered if Louisiana could speak to that.
Okay, so the first part regarding the org chart rules under the Human Services branch, that piece is not in the 4B plan. The second part that Christy described, that's something that we just really started implementing in detail this go-round after COVID. So it's not in this 4B plan, but it will go in our next APSR. But if details are needed, if anybody would like to share it, if we need to share it, we can.
Thanks so much. I wonder if we can stay with Louisiana for just a minute. Did Louisiana still have a plan for pandemics in place? And if so, was it helpful during the current COVID pandemic?
Hey, John. So I'm not sure exactly what you mean by a plan for pandemics. You're talking about like visitation restrictions and that sort of thing?
I think for this one, we just need a little bit of clarity to be able to answer. I'm sorry. I know we're on a tight time frame here.
Oh, that's okay. I tell you what, while John is typing in, let me go back over here to, there's a question from Melissa about what methods did you use to communicate that the roundtable was taking place for the young people to attend? Did you use radio or commercials? What was the method of communication there?
Hi, yeah, this is Melissa. We did a lot of posting on social media, reaching out to other agencies that also worked with that same population to kind of spread the word and to be our champion. We also used 1 or 2 interviews on the news as well, just so we can get a lot of people to the town hall.
That sounds super. I'm going to go back to Pod 2 for a minute, and we've got a question about what has been helpful for those working from home who struggle with structuring their time with the distractions of home. And I think we can let anybody from the panel answer this one.
This is Deb. That's been a real challenge, this sort of balance of both equipping people to work from home. I think initially we kind of measured success in did we get everybody a computer and they could connect to the network and they could actually go home and do work. But the reality is a lot of the hard work now is equipping people to do it well. And that includes thinking about like how do we support people who are working from home. A lot of our staff have articulated the workday never sort of seems to end because it gets interrupted by home distractions, kids being home from school because of quarantine or virtual schooling or whatever. And so they may still get all of their work done, but it sort of occurs over a much extended work day. And so it is definitely, it's definitely something that I think we're continuing to work with our staff on trying to understand how to support them.
Yeah, and I just want to remind us, especially in situations like this, the anxiety that builds up and the mindfulness from both sides. You know, you have a worker trying to engage in doing her job. She or he wants to do it well, and they're worried about whether the alarm is going off next door or whether there's a lawnmower outside. There's a lot of anxiety that's being presented for both people who are delivering the service as well as the people who are receiving the information. You know, a big challenge right now with a lot of my birth fathers that are contacting me going, you know, my son is not engaging in our Zoom meetings. You know, he doesn't love me anymore. He doesn't like me anymore. He's this, he's that. And that anxiety and that kind of frustration, so helping them navigate through those types of events and recognizing, showing up with that trauma lens and recognizing that everybody has a little bit of trauma coming through these types of times with virtual meetings and virtual things that are happening.
Hi, so I would encourage folks to keep typing in your questions as they come to mind, and we will, again, follow up with some communication after the webinar. We want to thank everybody for participating in the panel, and I'm going to hand this back over to Nicole Barnes.
Great. Thanks so much, Tracy. We're going to keep it here on chat for just a second, but what we're going to do next is we're going to transition into some polling questions, and you'll have an opportunity to continue to type questions in the chat as we finish up, but we want to get some information from you all about your interest in some ongoing conversations around this topic. We know that COVID isn't going anywhere anytime soon, and obviously there may be some practices that we've all discovered through having to shift that we want to keep in place, and we want to see if you folks are interested in some ongoing and continuing opportunities to connect with each other and your peers on this topic. So Chris, if we could transition into our first set of polling questions, that would be great. Fantastic. So again, please feel free to continue to type questions in the chat. But we want to hear from you all on the line. First question is, are you the person or part of the team that is responsible for developing or writing the disaster plan at your agency? And then if yes, we want to hear your interest in continuing to participate perhaps in a short-term community of practice or an event series around ongoing disaster preparedness work. And if you're not sure, that's okay too. We're going to have another set of polling questions that's going to give you an idea of the kinds of activities that we might engage in and kind of get a feel for what you would be most interested in participating in. So I'll give everybody just a few more seconds there to answer that question. And again, if you're not, but you still would like to participate, you know, we'd love to hear from you too. I think that the intent is to really, we want to know who is interested in continuing to have these ongoing conversations and with who you want to have them. So continue to feel free to respond here, type in your answers. They are anonymous, although you can see what the kind of the poll total is. We cannot see who answered what. So. Okay. We'll just give it just a few more seconds here for folks to type in. Again, are you the person or part of the team responsible for developing or writing your agency's disaster plan? And if yes, rate your interest in participating in just a short-term community of practice around this. Okay, Chris, let's transition over to our second set of polls. Great.
Thank you. So these next three. So if you expressed an interest in participating in something like this, indicate the kinds of activities that would most interest you. We're looking at potentially a 3-event short series on topics that are selected by the group. Would you be interested in some web-based communication tools to give you a direct connection to your peers? Or some ongoing communication via conference call or web-based conferencing platforms? What would be most of interest to you? There's also an opportunity for you to say none of these, other, and tell us the kinds of activities you'd like to talk to your peers about. And then in that middle column there, we have some topics that we thought might be of interest just based on some of the research that we've been doing around this area. And we want to hear from you what would be the top 3 that you would be most interested in talking to your peers about regarding disaster planning and response. And then we're going to take the information from today's session and with our Children's Bureau partners and with our subject matter expert partners, we're going to roll out some stuff in the near future around how we can bring you all together to do exactly this. So I'll give it just another 15 seconds here, and then I'd like to, in just a moment, we're going to close out to our evaluation layout, and I just want to remind folks we do have an evaluation for today's session. It's really, really important that we hear your feedback so that we can continue to create meaningful and engaging opportunities for you all to talk with your peers about relevant topics of interest, to hear from subject matter experts, to hear from states that have best practices on all of these topics. And so we really want to hear from you what we're doing well and what we could improve on. And then if we could transition over into that evaluation layout there, Chris. So it does have the center's contact information. If you could hang on with me for just one more minute here. We do have our Stay Connected with the Center. You can sign up for information from our GovDelivery platform. You can also reach out to us individually at the capacity.childwelfare.gov/states or the capacityinfo@icf.com. For all of our speakers that have indicated they would be willing to share their contact information, we will send that out in some thank you and follow-up communication via the automated Adobe system. We will also take a moment to look at any of those questions that perhaps we were not able to get to in today's session that you had for speakers, and we will try to turn those around with all of the speakers and the presenters that you heard today. We really appreciate you joining us on this Thursday afternoon in December. We hope you got a lot out of this. We appreciate your participation, and please take just a few moments in that evaluation survey link above and tell us how we did.